The streets of New York were dark and silent, save for the faint hum of a distant subway train. Remo Williams walked alone, his mind consumed by the events of the day. He had just finished watching a movie, one that had left him feeling uneasy and unsettled. It was a horror film, one that had left him questioning the nature of reality itself. As he walked, Remo heard a rustling in the shadows. He turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness shrouded in a cloak. The figure stepped closer, and Remo could see its eyes glinted with an outworldly light. "Who are you?" Remo asked, his voice trembling. The figure spoke in a low, rumbling voice. "I am the one who has been watching you, Remo. I have been waiting for you to see the truth." "The truth?" Remo repeated. "What truth?" "The truth about the movie you just watched," the figure replied. "It was not just a movie. It was a portal, a gateway to the realm beyond your understanding. And now, Remo, you have opened the portal. You have let in something which cannot be contained." Remo's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. "What have I done?" "You have released a horror beyond comprehension," the figure said. "It is coming for you. It will find you, and it will take you." Remo tried to run. His legs felt heavy, as if he was moving through molasses. The figure pursued him, its cloak billowing behind it like a pair of wings. Remo could feel its breath on its back, hot and fetid. As he stumbled down the alleyway, Remo saw something that made his blood run cold. The shadows on the wall began to twist and writhe, forming shapes that no human mind could comprehend. A pair of glowing eyes appeared, and Remo knew that he had run out of time. He turned to face the figure, ready to fight to the death. But it was too late. The horror had overtaken him, and he was lost in a world of darkness and terror. From that day on, no one ever saw Remo again. Some say that he was taken by the horror that had been unleashed, and others say that he simply disappeared into the shadows, never to be seen again. But one thing is for sure, the movie that Remo Williams watched that night will never be forgotten. It was a horror beyond imagination, a nightmare that will haunt the world for eternity. Years passed, and the memory of Remo Williams faded into obscurity. But the horror that had unleashed continued to spread, its tendrils of darkness stretching out across the world. Those who watched the movie that Remo had seen began to experience strange and terrifying visions. They saw shadowy figures lurking in the shadows of their rooms, heard whispers in the darkness, and spoken unspeakable things. As the years went by, the horror grew stronger, its power spreading like a virus through the minds of those who had seen. And then, one day, it happened. The horror broke through the physical world. It started with small things, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night. But soon, the horror grew more bold, taking on a more tangible form. People began to disappear, their bodies were never found, and those who witnessed the horror in action were driven to madness, their minds shattered by the most incomprehensible terror. The government tried to contain the horror, but it was too late. The world had been infected, and there was no turning back. The horror had taken on a life of its own, a malevolent force that could not be contained. And then, one day, a group of survivors banded together, determined to fight back against the horror. They were led by a woman named Sarah, a former scientist who had been studying the horror for years. Together, they delved deep into the bowels of the city, seeking out the source of the horror. And what they found was beyond anything they had ever imagined. In the depths of the abandoned theater, they discovered a portal, the same portal that Remo Williams had opened up all those years ago. And through that portal, they saw the horror. A seething mass of darkness and malevolence walking and waiting to consume the world. The survivors knew that they had to do something. They had to close the portal to seal away the horror once and for all. And so they prepared for a final battle, one that would determine the fate of the world. As they fought their way through hordes of the horror's minions, Sarah and her team reached the portal, and then, with a final burst of strength, she closed, trapping the horror on the other side. The survivors emerged from the theater, battered and bloodied, but victorious. The horror had been defeated, and the world could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But Sarah knew that the horror was not truly gone, would always be waiting, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to open the portal once again. And so she decided. She dedicated her life to studying, determining to find a way to destroy it once and for all. For in a world where the horror lurks just beyond the edges of our own reality, there can be no rest, no peace, only the constant struggle to keep the darkness at bay. Sarah and her team left the theater, eyes blinking in the bright sunlight, their clothes torn and strained with the horrors they had faced, but they were alive, and that was all that mattered. As they stumbled towards the safety of their waiting vehicles, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The horror had been defeated, yes, but for how long? How many more portals were there, waiting to be opened? "Sarah," one of her team members said, his voice shaking, "do you think we've really stopped it? The horror, I mean?" Sarah paused, considering the question. "No," she said finally. "I don't think we have, but we've brought ourselves some time, at least. That time is something we desperately need." As they climbed into their vehicles, Sarah couldn't help but think back to Remo Williams. Had he known what he was doing when he opened the portal? Or had he simply been a victim like so many others? She knew that she would never have the answers to those questions, but she did not know. And she only knew one thing. She couldn't let the horror win. She had to keep fighting no matter the cost. As they drove away from the theater, Sarah's mind was already racing, planning her next move. She needed to find the other portals and close them off before the horror could escape once again. She knew that it wouldn't be easy. It was cunning and patient, would wait, biding its time until found. And until it found another unsuspecting victim to open the door. But Sarah was determined to stop it. She would do whatever it took as long as it took, until that horror was destroyed once and for all. As the vehicles pulled away, leaving the theater behind, Sarah took one last look back. She could almost feel a malevolent gaze following her, waiting for its chance to strike. But she was ready. She had faced this horror and survived, and she knew that she would do it again and again until it was finally defeated. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah, as well as her team, scoured the city for any signs. They visited every movie theater, every abandoned building, searching for any signs of a potential portal. Their search was exhausting. They never gave up. Sarah was determined to find every single portal and seal it, no matter how long it took. One evening, as Sarah and her team were driving back to their base, they received a call. It was a frantic message from a young couple who had been watching a movie in an old theater. They had seen something strange on the screen, something that had filled them with a sense of dread. Sarah knew what this meant. This horror had found another way into their world. They drove to the theater as fast as they could, their hearts pounding with fear. When they arrived, they found a couple huddled, their eyes wide with terror. "We saw it," the young man said, his voice shaking. "We saw what you call the horror." Sarah knew that she had to do something. She took a deep breath. She stepped forward. "Please, tell me everything you saw," she said. "Every detail." As the couple spoke, Sarah listened intently. She took notes, jotting down every detail, every nuance of what they had seen. And then, when they were finished, she made a plan. "We need to get to the projection booth," she said. "We need to see if there's a portal there." Her team nodded as they began to move towards the back of the theater. But as they climbed the stairs to the projection booth, they heard something strange. A low, rumbling noise like distant thunder. Sarah's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. As they reached the top of the stairs, they saw it. A swirling vortex of darkness, hovering just above the projector. And then, as if on cue, the horror began to emerge. It started as a shadow, a shapeless mass of darkness. It began to coalesce into something more solid, and then, as Sarah and her team watched in horror, it took on a more tangible form. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, a creature of pure darkness with jagged teeth, glowing eyes that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Sarah knew that she had to do something. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a high-powered caliber, designed to seal portals permanently. She took aim, steadying her hand, and fired. A laser projection hit the portal dead on, and the creature howled in agony. It writhed and twisted, its form becoming more and more disoriented as the portal began to close. And then, with a final burst of energy, the portal was gone. It seemed as if the horror was trapped yet once again, sealed away in its own dimension. As Sarah and her team made their way out of the theater, they were exhausted but victorious. They had stopped this horror once again, hopefully saving countless lives in the process. Sarah knew that there would be more portals, and likely there would always be more portals, more opportunities for it to escape. And so she resolved to keep fighting, to keep searching for every last one until it was finally defeated. For in a world where the horror lurked just beyond the edges of our reality, there could be no rest, no peace, only the constant struggle to keep the darkness at bay. In the days that followed, Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to ensure that they remained trapped in their own dimension. They continued to scour the streets and look for any signs of new portals. Despite their best efforts, they knew that the horror would never truly be defeated. It was a force of pure malevolence and eternal darkness that would always find a way to keep through the cracks in reality. Sarah began to prepare for the worst. She knew that one day the horror would find a way to break free, and when it did, it would be more powerful than ever before. She trained her team relentlessly, honing their skills and preparing them for the worst-case scenario. She studied every piece of lore, every fragment of knowledge that she could find, determined to learn as much as she could about this horror and its ways. And then, one day, it happened. They received a call. Again, a group of teenagers. These teenagers had stumbled upon an old abandoned cinema. Foolishly, they decided to watch a horror movie that they had found in a dusty old box, not realizing that it was more than just a film. Sarah and her team raced to the cinema, their hearts heavy with dread. When they arrived, they found the teenagers. Like last time, these teenagers, their eyes were wide with fear. "It's coming," one of them whispered. "We saw it. It's coming." And then they heard it. The low rumbling noise that Sarah knew all too well. It was on its way. She didn't waste a moment. She ordered her team to evacuate the cinema, to get the teenagers to safety. And then, with a sense of grim determination, she made her way to the projection booth. She knew that the horror would be waiting there, and she was ready. As she climbed the stairs, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that it was the final showdown, the moment that everything could be decided. And then as she reached for the top of the stairs, she saw it. There it was, waiting for her. The swirling vortex of darkness that filled the entire room, and in the center of that vortex she saw something that made her blood run cold. Remo Williams. He was trapped within the horror, his body writhing in agony. As the darkness consumed him, Sarah knew that she had to act fast before it was too late. She raised her laser, aiming for the heart of the vortex, and then, with a sense of grim determination, she fired. It hit the vortex dead end. The horror howled in agony. It twisted its form, becoming more and more disoriented as the laser began to close the portal. And then, with a final burst of energy, it was gone. The horror was sealed away once again, trapped within its own dimension. But Sarah knew that this victory had come at a heavy cost. Remo Williams was gone, consumed by the darkness, and she knew that there would always be more horrors lurking just beyond the edges of reality, waiting for their chance to strike. But she was ready. She had faced this horror and survived, and she knew that she would do it again and again until the darkness was finally defeated.